produces, above all, art zone. Gravediggers.
Hi guys.
Hey folks.
Hope you're doing well. Welcome to another episode of Das Criminal Podcast.
Yeah, and I hope you're enjoying the beginning of summer. You're getting a lot of sunshine.
How are you feeling, Amr?
Much better, actually.
Good.
Ignoring the cracking in the voice, my symptoms from my allergies have been a lot better. Unless you're a listener in the southern hemisphere, then I hope your winter is okay.
Ooh, good point. So, shall we get right into it?
Yeah, let's get in.
November 8th, 2010. An uncharacteristically warm autumn night in Toronto, Canada. 911 dispatch receives a frantic call about a home invasion. The young woman on the line yells, "Help me, please, I need help, I don't know where my parents are." The 911 operator hears a scream in the background, and the young woman responds, "Dad, I'm calling 911, I'm okay." A few minutes later, York Regional Police arrive at a bloody scene. In an apparent robbery, the father of the family, Han Pan, has been shot in the face but miraculously survived to collapse in front of the house. EMTs quickly transport him to Markham Stouffville Hospital. Jennifer Pan, the daughter, is bound upstairs. She's the young woman who managed to call 911. After searching the premises to be sure the intruders had left, law enforcement unties her. When the police descend into the home's basement, they found Bich Pan, the mother, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. Face down in front of a sofa, she's wearing green Winnie the Pooh pajamas. Her feet are still wet from the water soak she had been doing after her line dancing class when the intruders broke into her home. Almost immediately, aspects of the crime strike investigators as odd. This wasn't like any home robbery they'd seen before. Robbers usually ransack homes looking for valuables, but the intruders left large, expensive objects like electronics and the family's 2 luxury vehicles untouched. The thieves murdered Bich and attempted to murder Han, but left Jennifer alive. It's rare for home burglars to attack people. They usually just want your stuff and want to avoid the kind of police attention that murder or attempted murder will bring.
Yeah, plus, the condition that if they're ever caught, there's a massive gulf in sentencing between robbery, even armed robbery, and murder or attempted murder. So no self-respecting thief or burglar would kill inhabitants when it's easier to just, wear a mask to hide your identity and just tie the people down.
Plus, if the intruders shot Bich and Han to eliminate witnesses, why leave Jennifer unharmed? Why did Han, whose daughter was yelling for him from upstairs, run outside the house rather than to his child? Law enforcement quickly realizes that in the case of the Pan family's home invasion, not everything is as it seems. They turn their attention toward one of the central characters in the event, Jennifer Pan herself. Before we get into the details of the police investigation, let's dissect the circumstances leading up to the robbery and the dynamics of the Pan family. Bich Ha and Hui Han Pan immigrated to Canada separately from Vietnam as refugees. They were part of the Han Chinese diaspora in Vietnam, called the Viet Hoa. They both spoke Cantonese and Vietnamese.
Yeah, there's actually a pretty significant Viet diaspora population in Canada, mostly in Vancouver and Toronto, but also elsewhere.
Bich and Han married in Toronto and had 2 children, Jennifer, born in 1986, and Felix, born 3 years later. They both worked at an auto parts factory called Magna International. Bich and Han lived frugally and saved their money to eventually move from a neighborhood called Scarborough, which has some sketchy areas, to a nearby town called Markham.
Yeah, Scarborough is a very working-class neighborhood of Toronto. It has a large either first-gen or second-gen immigrant population, and generally speaking, very little investment by the city or province in terms of development. But of course, this is starting to change with gentrification creeping in. Before that, however, Scarborough's nickname was Scarburbia to reflect its sort of sketchy areas.
So the Pan family moves to Markham. Over 45% of Markham's population is ethnically Chinese, so the Pan family would not have stood out as an East Asian family in the area.
Yeah, and just to note, unlike Scarborough, which is considered part of the city of Toronto proper and has representatives on Toronto City Council, Markham is considered a regional municipality with its own separate mayor and council, but it's still considered part of the greater Toronto area.
Right. This case sort of goes into the general Toronto-based true crime cases, but Markham is technically separate. And the police here
Yeah,
are not Toronto police, they're the York Regional Police.
yeah.
By 2010, the Pans lived in a large suburban home, drove a Mercedes-Benz and a Lexus, and had accumulated $200,000 in savings, I assume Canadian dollars.
Yeah, presumably.
The Pans had worked hard to build fruitful lives in Canada and expected their children to succeed in their education and prosper in their future careers. Part of this case really resonates with me, and I'm sure with our listeners too. My great-grandparents were hardworking Polish people. My Jaji worked in an auto factory just like the Pans, and they lived humble lives while they saved all their money to put toward their children's education. If your family or parts of your family are made up of more recent immigrants like mine is, you might see some of your own experiences reflected in this case.
Ironically, in my family, I'm the one who immigrated, like I'm the one who's doing the immigration. So if I ever have kids, and it's a big if, but if I ever have kids, I'll be the one who's like, I immigrated for you guys. Not that I would ever actually say something like that, but yeah.
Bich and Han placed high expectations on Jennifer and Felix. Some might describe them as tiger parents, a term coined by Yale Law School professor Amy Chua to characterize demanding parents who pressure their children to excel in school and extracurricular activities like music and sports. Tiger parenting is often associated with parents of Asian backgrounds, like Amy Chua herself. In her book, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, Chua writes about the strict regimen in her household. Her daughters were forbidden from attending sleepovers and playdates, watching television or playing video games, choosing their own extracurriculars, and getting any grade below an A. They were expected to be 2 years ahead of their peers in math and only engage in competitive activities where they'd always be expected to take first place.
Yeah, I'm sure that will result in her children being very healthy, normal, adjusted adults with no psychological issues whatsoever. Also, I really want to read this book by Chua, but I don't want to support her in any way because she sounds like a psychopath.
I think anyone who proudly writes a book about essentially emotionally abusing her own children, yikes.
Yeah.
So we'll repeatedly ask during this episode, at which point does authoritarian parenting become abuse? Some of our long-term listeners probably know this already, but I used to work at an English academy in Korea, and we actually had a lesson there as part of the curriculum about tiger parenting. If you ask them, most of the students would tell you that their parents wanted them to excel in school, but they wouldn't call them tiger parents. Nearly all these kids had cell phones and played video games. Some had parents who would call the school and ask for specific feedback about their kids. But I don't think that's over the top for parents worried about their kids' performance, to reach out and ask how they could improve. This was also a private for-profit academy called a hagwon or cram school. So these students' parents must have at least put some priority into their education, or they wouldn't pay for them to be there. Lots of the students were enrolled in multiple academies for different subjects. So you've got foreign language and STEM subjects. Those seem to be the most popular. But I had a student who loved to draw and she did art lessons, and another who was really into this Korean music genre called trot, and her parents signed her up for an academy to learn it. So on the first day of class, when I asked the students questions like, what do you do for fun? This little girl goes, I like trot. And I was like, is this 8-year-old Korean child telling me she considers Leon Trotsky a particular interest of hers?
Well, it depends. Was she trying to sell you newspapers? Because that's what Trotsky is. If she was trying to sell you newspapers, she's definitely a Trotskyist.
She did all of her in-class projects about trot music, so I know a lot about it now.
What is it? Is it electronic type of genre or what?
No, it's more like a classic type of genre.
Oh, okay.
So in English, I'd compare it maybe to Frank Sinatra, and in Arabic, like Kulthum.
Ah, okay, that makes sense.
But it's not exactly the same style, just sort of the same period and idea.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I think we need to be careful not to classify any parent who cares about their child's education, especially if that parent is Asian, as a tiger parent. Plenty of people take a healthy interest in their children's development without being overbearing or abusive.
I think the line for me lies in the amount of freedom a parent grants their children. Because it's very normal and perhaps even healthy for a parent to be concerned about their kids' academic performances. I know my mom was very strict in her expectations of my academic excellence, but Chua's book above describes a genuine suffocation of freedom. Like there's a difference between encouraging kids to take extracurriculars, but then choosing those extracurriculars for them is where I think it veers from being supportive into being controlling and abusive. And, kids can play video games and have fun and go on sleepovers and still excel academically and artistically and so on. It's not mutually exclusive. And I really think Chua, and I mean, this is a very obvious point, she understates the stunted social development this kind of parenting causes.
I think, too, there's even a huge difference between, my parents would allow us to choose our extracurriculars, but we had to complete them. So if it was a sport, we had to do the whole season and such. They wouldn't let us quit halfway through because they said, you wanted to sign up for this, we're paying for it, you're doing it. I think that's totally fair.
Oh, that's completely fair, yeah. Well, it also teaches, perseverance, I think, that.
Right. There is a style of parenting which is balanced in that parents care about their children's development, but don't suffocate them.
Yeah.
But where did Bich and Han Pan fall on the parental involvement spectrum? Canadian journalist Jeremy Grimaldi notes that while tiger parenting can produce high-achieving children, it can also lead to, in the words of Dr. Helen Sue of the Asian American Psychological Association, quote, extremely poor emotional indicators, end quote. Grimaldi continues, quote, although it would be foolish to say that any book, including Chua's, can accurately illustrate the scenario inside another person's house, the similarities are so striking between her account and the parenting style described by Jennifer in the Pan household, sometimes down to the minute details, that the role of tiger parenting in Jennifer's life should be examined, end quote. So, let's examine. Bich and Han enrolled Jennifer in piano classes when she was 4 years old, and she showed talent at the instrument. Again, I can relate to this. When I was 4, I started playing the violin at this academy where we learned through this specific pedagogy called the Suzuki method. Most of the other kids at the school were Asian, and some students were under more pressure than others to advance. Honestly, though, I think the Suzuki method has a lot of solid points, and it developed me into a skilled musician and an eager learner overall. Some people think it's intense to sign very young children up for music lessons, but the Suzuki philosophy is that children learn through immersion from an early age. I'm actually really grateful my parents paid for those lessons, and I had a great experience with the program.
I mean, neuroscientifically, it's been shown that the younger you are, the more malleable your brain is. And obviously, you're not going to put a 1-year-old through music classes. But something like 4 and 5-year-olds, it's good to start them early because the earlier they start, the more their brain adapts to absorbing different lessons. And not only that, but it's been shown that if you inculcate those kind of things early, if you teach kids a music skill or a language early, it sets them up for them to absorb information easier later on in life.
Right. That's the exact philosophy of the Suzuki method, that children can learn music like a language.
Yeah.
And I can only speak for myself here, but for me, it's very true. I think in a musical language in my head when I'm playing, or even thinking about other things like math and stuff.
That's so cool. I wish I had that.
Yeah, so again, I'm grateful, and I think there's a difference between signing your child up for music lessons and making them practice as a mandatory part of their daily routine, and then berating them for not performing as well as you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I really wish my parents signed me up for musical lessons, but, my mom considered music and art as trifling distractions from academia, particularly STEM, which she expected me to focus on. If I had kids of my own, like I said, I'm definitely going to enroll them in music classes of some sort, but I'm not going to tell them they have to win every recital or competition or whatnot. It's more here's an extracurricular, try your best at it, and if you don't like it, we'll move to another extracurricular of some sort.
Right. I also want to sign my kids up for music lessons if I have kids, but they can choose the instrument,
Yeah.
Jennifer also did competitive figure skating from age 6 and amassed a case full of trophies. Figure skating is an expensive sport that takes serious dedication to succeed, but Jennifer did really well. Until, that is, she tore a ligament in her knee. The injury ripped away her hopes of competing nationally and shooting for the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver. Jennifer's early teachers and administrators remember her fondly as a bright and dedicated student. She performed well academically and was eager to earn their approval. She was a perfectionist and worked on an endless rotation to do school, piano, and skating. Bich and Han pressured Jennifer to perform the best in all these activities. Even her brother Felix would later admit that their expectations for Jennifer were consistently higher than they were for him, and they responded more harshly to what they saw as her failures, though they were tough on both the children. Due to these commitments, Jennifer was rarely allowed to spend time with friends or go to sleepovers. As a result, Grimaldi describes Jennifer as, quote, emotionally stunted, end quote. When she graduated from grade 8, Jennifer expected to receive awards for her academic achievements, including the honor of valedictorian, but none of this happened for her. She was shocked and disappointed that her hard work didn't amount to any recognition from the school. This is basically the plot of the movie Booksmart, if you've seen it. Molly thinks she's better than her classmates because she got into Yale, but then they tell her that they too got into Ivy League universities and partied during high school. Lots of people work hard. I'm going to read a quote from Jennifer that Grimaldi includes in his book, A Daughter's Deadly Deception, that I think gives us good insight into her feelings. Quote, I was one of the top of my class in elementary school. I tried very hard to get high marks, but during grade 8 graduation, I didn't get any solid prizes for all my hard work. Because I had taken piano and skating from a young age, when I did well in those occasions, I got medals, I got ribbons, I got trophies, badges. All that hard work accumulated to nothing or no credibility at the end of grade 8. They just brushed me aside. I didn't even get one single good behavior award, so I just thought that in high school, what was the point in trying? It was important to me because I had felt growing up the recognition had come from my figure skating and my piano. And that was solid 100% recognition you can boast about to friends and family. Hey, I got first place. Here's my gold medal or second place or third place. So it was almost proof that I had done well. When I didn't get any awards, I was shocked. I felt I was almost invisible in that school for the 10 years I attended and tried very hard. End quote. So as we can see, Jennifer needed recognition from others to thrive. She was motivated entirely by her parents pushing her to earn awards, rather than any kind of self-motivation. She doesn't know how to feel good about her hard work without somebody else praising her. Also, it's 8th grade. I understand that when you're 14 years old and your whole life until that point has been working hard at school, it probably feels like a giant snub, but it points to Jennifer's immaturity that she held on to this moment as a failure that shaped the rest of her life, like she had a grudge. She had no healthy way to deal with failure or disappointment.
Yeah, I think this is why it's so important for kids to be put into team sports or other situations where you learn to take loss with grace. Learning to lose and not to having it devastate your identity is one of the most important aspects of growing up. Though the caveat here is that many of the greatest athletes in history were and are notoriously sore losers and basically hate losing more than anything, like Michael Jordan. Though it's ironic because with a lot of these athletes, if you read their interviews and their background, their parents were always very supportive and mild and very not necessarily pressuring. The motivation is intrinsic is basically what I'm trying to say is their hatred to lose isn't so much to validate their parents as it is an internal desire to be the best at a particular field.
Right. It's different for everyone. I mean, I know personally, if I feel like I am failing, nobody else has to tell me, I am the hardest on myself. And other people will be like, Erin, it's fine. It's not a big deal. And I'm like, no, it is.
Oh, same. Absolutely. Yeah.
So for high school, Jennifer attended Mary Ward Catholic Secondary, one of the few self-directed learning schools in Canada where students have a looser schedule, more similar to university than a strict high school block schedule. Jennifer made some friends at school, but she didn't have the academic success she'd had before. She was averaging 70% in all her classes except music. Now, I think the self-directed learning model was not a good fit for Jennifer. First, she performed best with constant validation like physical awards and medals, and being outside a regular classroom environment meant she didn't have people around her to praise her. Second, she was used to a strict schedule, and Mary Ward didn't function that way. But Jennifer knew that her parents would not be happy if she brought home a report card full of C's, so she doctored them. She got out her scissors and glue and used a photocopier to forge a report with straight A's. Bich and Han thought she was doing great in school. Now, this is the first of Jennifer's big lies. Since universities in Canada typically don't look at scores from grades 9 and 10, she thought it wasn't a huge deal. But it's the start of a pattern of behavior for her.
I mean, I have to admit, learning to doctor report cards is a pretty impressive skill in and of itself. So, credit for her creativity for coming up with an unconventional solution.
And looking in from the outside, it's easy for us to say that she shouldn't have lied. If she was struggling in school, she should ask for help or consider transferring to a more structured program that could better fit her learning style. But I think she was genuinely terrified of disappointing her parents, since her relationship with them seems to have hinged on whether or not she performed well and received awards. Moreover, I think if we take Jennifer at her word in the previous quote about being devastated that she wasn't recognized for her hard work at school, I think it's possible that she felt as though as long as she got recognition for getting good grades, like praise from her parents, then she was succeeding. It's as though her actual grades were imaginary since she'd worked out a way to achieve the recognition she wanted without the consequences of the low scores. Studies have repeatedly shown that children with strict parents are more likely to lie and eventually learn to become convincing liars. If a child knows she will be punished for something, of course she'll say whatever she thinks her parents want to hear to avoid negative consequences. Though Jennifer was forbidden by her parents from dating, she grew close with a boy in the year above her named Daniel Wong on a band trip to Europe in 2003, when Jennifer was in grade 11, so she would have been 16 or 17 years old. Jennifer didn't tell her parents about this relationship since she knew they wouldn't have approved of her dating someone. So she lied about having a boyfriend. Jennifer later expressed other reasons her family wouldn't like Daniel. First, he had a history and a criminal record for dealing drugs. Second, he was half Filipino, and Jennifer said her dad wouldn't accept her dating someone with a Filipino background, which, if true, yikes.
Yeah, from what I've heard from Asian friends, there's definitely a sort of widespread bias by other Asians against the Filipino people.
Yeah, not good. We know from the episode way back when about Gypsy Rose Blanchard, no interference from parents can halt the unstoppable train that is teenage hormones. So whether or not a parent forbids their child from dating is irrelevant. Unless that child is homeschooled, they just will date someone at school and not tell their parents about it. Jennifer managed to receive early acceptance into Ryerson University, a public research university in Toronto, but she failed calculus and wasn't able to graduate from high school, so Ryerson withdrew its offer. Once again, Jennifer thought it was a better idea to lie to her parents than ask for their help. So instead of telling them about the calculus class and possible change to her university timeline, she pretended that everything was fine. She was attending Ryerson to do a science degree and would then transfer to the University of Toronto's pharmacology program. Jennifer went to great lengths to convince her parents that she was attending Ryerson. She bought used biology and physics textbooks to load into her backpack before heading downtown for class. But in fact, she spent her time at public libraries and hanging out with Daniel at York University. Jennifer worked some shifts at Eastside Mario's Pizzeria in Markham and at Boston Pizza where Daniel worked. She also taught piano lessons. So it's not as though she was totally financially dependent on her parents, though she did forge papers to convince her parents she had received scholarships and loans for school. This whole thing just makes me cringe. Like, they're eventually going to find out something happened when you're not a pharmacologist.
Yeah, I mean, I do think she deserves some credits for finding avenues of productivity, if not self-fulfillment. Like, conducting piano lessons is a pretty good and legitimate gig that deserves respect. Plus, working in the service industry, which is also impressive in and of itself.
But if you have any kind of anxieties or something, this whole episode, like when I was writing the notes and listening to other podcasts about it to write the notes, I was like, stop.
Oh, yeah, same. Yeah.
After Jennifer had faked 2 years of study at Ryerson, she told her parents that she'd been accepted into U of T's pharmacology program. Bich and Han were delighted. I'm sure this whole time Jennifer's parents were proudly telling people that she was studying pharmacology at U of T. Oof.
I haven't seen this mentioned anywhere, and believe me, I looked. But it would have been hilarious for Jennifer to have bought her parents, those U of T hoodies and mugs and really sell the story of her being a student with all the paraphernalia of being a parent of a U of T student.
I mean, one of my parents drove around with a sticker from my undergraduate university on their car.
But that is actually hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, because they were so proud of me. Could you imagine if I never even went there?
Yeah, that wouldn't be nice.
I
Yeah.
did, though. My mom listens to our podcast. Mom, I want you to know I have all the degrees that I said I got.
Yeah, I second that. Erin's mom, don't worry, like she's saying the truth.
Jennifer convinced her parents that it would be better for her commute to stay with her friend Topaz, awesome name by the way, 3 nights a week, closer to the city center. With some pushing from Bich, Han finally agreed. But of course, Jennifer was not staying with Topaz. Instead, Monday through Wednesday, she stayed with Daniel and his family. Every time his parents wanted to meet Bich and Han, Jennifer came up with an excuse. Then, it was time for Jennifer to graduate from U of T. Jennifer and Daniel managed to hire someone online who would create a fake transcript for Jennifer to show her parents with straight A's, just as she faked in high school. Jennifer also told her parents that the ceremony would be too crowded for each graduate to bring 2 guests, and since she couldn't choose between them, she gave the ticket to a friend instead.
Yeah, that is red flag number one, or like at least red flag like 100 or whatever in the story. Because as a U of T graduate myself, I can guarantee that like the U of T gives each alumnus 2 tickets for their own ceremony.
My master's graduation was online because of COVID, so I just sent my mom a link and said, like, at the 15-minute mark, they read my name, and she's like, great.
Wow, that sucks that it was
Yeah.
online. Yeah.
By this point, however, Bich and Han were growing suspicious. Jennifer had told them that while getting her degree, she was volunteering at the blood testing lab at Sick Kids. She told them the hours would be more on the weekends. We know this was like a ploy so she could spend more time with Daniel.
Rule number 1 of Y Club. Don't overcomplicate the story. Just stick to basics and don't take unnecessary risks.
Yeah, this is a major sign if someone's lying, if they just keep offering up detail after detail.
Lies don't need detail. They need to be as minimal as possible.
But Han noticed that Jennifer didn't have a uniform or identification card from Sick Kids, things a volunteer would likely need.
Okay, so I work at Sick Kids right now. I don't even work for them. I work at Sick Kids as an independent, I work for an external organization that I'm part of the Sick Kids liaison team. And I can testify that you need an identity card if you work there, even if you're just like a summer student or a volunteer, because everyone needs an identity card there. Like, I'm not sure about the uniform. I don't think you need to own one, but you definitely need an ID card.
So one day, Bich and Han insisted on dropping Jennifer off at the hospital, and Bich tailed her inside. Realizing she was under surveillance, Jennifer hid in the ER for hours until they left. But Bich and Han still weren't convinced. Early the following day, they called Jennifer's friend Topaz and asked to speak to their daughter. Topaz told them that Jennifer wasn't there. Jennifer's parents were livid. The chain of lies began unraveling. Jennifer confessed that she hadn't been a student at U of T or a volunteer at Sick Kids, but withheld the details about never having graduated or attended Ryerson either. Han wanted to throw Jennifer out, but Bich convinced him to let her stay. Jennifer was allowed to remain in the house under a stringent set of rules. Her parents confiscated her electronics for 2 weeks, only letting her use them after when they were in the room, and conducted surprise checks on her messages. She was not allowed to see Daniel, and she had to quit working at the pizza shops and only teach piano. They even tracked the odometer in her car to make sure she wasn't driving elsewhere. Jennifer is about 22 years old at this point. Lying to her parents was terrible, especially if she took any money for tuition and then didn't go to school. But they also need to reckon with the fact that they didn't raise a responsible, well-adjusted adult.
Couple of points here. 1, their insistence that she quit the pizza shops but continued to teach piano betrays a very classist or otherwise patronizing view of the service industry that is actually very common among first-gen immigrants, though not exclusive to them, obviously, which is the idea that we immigrated here, we worked very hard to put you through school and university so you could get quote-unquote real jobs and not have to, work flipping pizzas or whatever, which is a very sort of like, again, like I said, classist and a sort of reactionary view of labor. But secondly, tracking the odometer is just a next level deranged move, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with both those points. In retrospect, I see why Bich would want to defend Jennifer against Han kicking her out, but it probably would have been better for her and her family if they would have helped her move out and start setting up her new life somewhere else.
I don't think kicking her out would have meant helping her set up a life elsewhere. I mean, in this household. I think it would have ended up being a complete excommunication, which for someone who's so dependent on parental validation might have genuinely been intolerable.
No, I agree. I mean, it probably would have been the best move to help her transition to living on her own, but I don't think they would have done that in a healthy way. I think her options, as you said, were being completely kicked out or living under their thumb.
Yeah, exactly.
Despite her parents' ban, Jennifer continued seeing Daniel. Bich would sometimes allow her to check her messages when Han wasn't home, and Jennifer would sneak calls to Daniel in the middle of the night. She still managed to visit him in between piano lessons. One night, Jennifer snuck out of the house to see Daniel and got caught when she wasn't in her room the next morning. Once again, her parents forbade her from seeing or speaking to Daniel Wong, but Jennifer didn't want to cut off contact. Jennifer is 24 years old at this point. You can't just keep grounding her and trying to force her to break up with her boyfriend. But Daniel was also growing tired of his relationship with Jennifer. They were too old to be sneaking around in fear of her parents. So he broke up with Jennifer and soon after began seeing someone else named Christine. Jennifer, heartbroken and angry, reverted to the kind of scheming she knew best, lying. She told Daniel that she had been gang raped in her house, and then a few days later, she received a bullet in the post, a threat from Christine. This is not good. I'm unsure whether Daniel believed her, but eventually the two began exchanging flirty messages again, so it seems like she got her way.
Yikes. I mean, this escalated very quickly. Also, sorry, I don't mean to be scrutable here, but you can't just buy a bullet at the local bodega here in Toronto. They're not exactly easy to access, which is another big red flag. And also, Daniel had been helping her lie this entire time to her parents for a period of years. Surely he, out of all people, would be aware that she is capable and willing to lie to get what she wants.
I'm not sure whether Jennifer actually planted a bullet or if she just lied to Daniel about it, but yeah, he had to have known something was not right.
Yeah, which either paints him as a moron or as culpable as she is.
Mm-hmm. In 2010, Jennifer reconnected with a friend named Andrew Montemayor and his roommate, Ricardo Duncan. When Jennifer told them about her situation at home, Montemayor told her he'd thought about killing his own dad, and Duncan agreed that for a fee, he would kill Han Pan in the parking lot at his work. Jennifer gave Duncan $1,500 that she'd earned teaching piano, but then he stopped returning her calls. She realized he wasn't going to follow through with the plan. Duncan denies this, saying Jennifer asked him to kill her father, but he said he wouldn't do that. He says the only money she ever gave him was $200 for a night out, and he paid her back. But the seed had already been planted, and Jennifer wasn't ready to give up on the idea. So she and Daniel hatched another plan to arrange for Bich and Han to be killed and collect her part of the inheritance, which they estimated at $500,000 after it was split with her brother, Felix. Daniel gave Jennifer an iPhone and a spare SIM card, which she only used in connection with the murder plot. He contacted an acquaintance named Lenford Crawford, ouch, bad name, who agreed to kill Jennifer's parents for a meager sum of $10,000.
Okay, another friendly Das Criminal tip to our listeners. Never, ever, 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 ever use digital or written communication method whatsoever when you're planning any sort of crime. It's recommended that you meet face to face and speak to the other person verbally, preferably in public but away from phones, because anything done on a digital device or near a digital device is traceable. No matter how hard you try to do it dark, even things like Signal and Tor have backdoors that are extremely traceable with the right tools, which almost all law enforcements have.
I also think this sounds way too cheap for a good hit job, but apparently, the average payment for a contract killing is around $15,000. I'm not sure whether most assassins charge more to kill two people in one ambush like Jennifer wanted for Bich and Han, or if there's typically a 2-for-1 sale. I tarnished my search history looking these sorts of things up so you don't have to.
It appears that assassinations are a lot like chicken breasts at Costco, where you buy in bulk because they're much cheaper in bulk.
Keep in mind, though, at the current exchange rate, 10,000 Canadian dollars is about 8,000 US dollars. So really, Jennifer and Daniel were paying just over half the average rate, and they wanted 2 people dead. So they cheaped out.
Yeah, which shows that in situations like this, it's better not to cheap out.
On November 2nd, 2010, 6 days before the invasion, Daniel texted Jennifer that he wanted to be in a relationship with Christine. Jennifer was devastated and asked to call off the hit. Daniel wrote back, "I thought you wanted this for you." Jennifer eventually agreed, saying, "I want it for me." All the pieces about this case detail Jennifer's shady history, and rightfully so. But what about Daniel? He doesn't have the same personal connection to these people, the feelings that they hold him captive in his house and control him like a child. But he still arranges their murder and insists Jennifer go through with it?
To be fair, dropping $10,000 on a hit should be an intrinsically motivated act because, never plan to off your folks for a partner. Do it for yourself. Or don't do it at all, ideally.
On the evening of the 8th, Jennifer texted Lenford Crawford and agreed to go through with the hit. Her father was home reading the Vietnamese news and getting ready for bed. Her mother would be home from line dancing soon, and Felix was away studying engineering at McMaster University. At 10:02 p.m., Jennifer switched the light in the study on and off to signal that it was time. A few minutes later, Lenford Crawford and 2 other men, David Milvaganam and Eric Carty, walked through the front door of the Pans' home, brandishing firearms. The men pointed the guns at Bich and Han, who were terrified. Meanwhile, according to Jennifer, Eric Carty tied her arms behind her back and began collecting the cash in the house, about $2,500 in cash from Jennifer and $1,100 US dollars that the Pans had from a recent trip to the States. Bich pleaded with the men not to hurt her daughter. This is so heartbreaking. I don't think Bich and Han were perfect parents, but this is so gut-wrenchingly sad.
Yeah, I do think they loved their kids in a it's flawed, very unhealthy way, but they did love their kids in a manner of speaking.
The men led Bich and Han down to the basement, covered their heads with blankets, and shot each of them multiple times. Bich was killed instantly. In Han's case, the bullet ricocheted against his skull, miraculously saving his life.
In Arabic, when we want to say someone is stubborn, we say rasa yabis, which means they have a hard head. So I guess Han was a very stubborn man if he had a titanium-level skull.
I think something similar happened when the Taliban shot Malala in the head, which is how she survived. It's rare, but it can happen.
Oh, yeah, that's what happened, yeah.
It also depends on the caliber of the weapon. Richard Ramirez, otherwise known as the Night Stalker, shot people in the face with a .22 semi-automatic pistol, and they survived. Tied upstairs, Jennifer managed to call 911. York Regional Police arrived at the scene promptly, but, as we said at the top of the episode, noticed some problems with Jennifer's story. For instance, the keys to Han's Lexus were right by the front door, but nobody stole the car. The front door was unlocked, which is how the intruders were able to enter, but they didn't even bring items common in home burglaries, like crowbars. Plus, the intruders shot Bich and Han, killing Bich, but left a witness unharmed. Han woke up from a coma 3 days later, and his account of the home invasion poked even more holes in Jennifer's story. Han recalled that Jennifer had been speaking to the intruders as if she knew them, and that her arms were not tied as she led them around the Pans' house. At the hospital, Han didn't want to see or speak to Jennifer. He knew, deep down, that she had been a part of Bich's murder, and the attempt on his life too. Law enforcement quickly zeroed in on Jennifer Pan as a suspect, rather than a victim in the home invasion. They interviewed her several times, something police try to avoid in cases where they don't believe someone might be involved, as it re-traumatizes victims. If you're interested, there's a 90-minute long video on YouTube titled Jennifer's Solution by a channel called JCS Criminal Psychology that features lots of footage from the interviews and breaks down the techniques used and Jennifer's responses. The Case File podcast episode on this case also spotlights audio of those interviews if you want to listen to Jennifer herself. There are a few things from those tapes I want to focus on. First, if you're familiar with law enforcement techniques, you'll realize immediately that the police see Jennifer as a suspect, and that she shouldn't be talking to them without a lawyer. If law enforcement ever asks you to come in for an interview, bring an attorney with you. Even if you know you did nothing wrong and they just want to speak to you as a witness or something, don't talk without legal counsel.
Yeah, one of the more insidious effects of the sort of TV crime genre, like Law and Order or CSI or whatever, is the idea that if you ask for a lawyer during an interview with the cops, it's a sign of guilt by definition. You can treat cops like your friends and you can just talk to them and they're going to be understanding. Like, no matter how innocent you are and you know you're innocent, if you ever talk to cops in that kind of setting, always insist on having an attorney present.
Also, Jennifer looks and speaks like a 16-year-old girl, even though she's 24. When the officer suggests that she may have masterminded the murder, she does a, me? No! Once again, it's very Gypsy Rose. The detective spends a long time talking to Jennifer about her circumstances at home under strict parenting, building up trust as he appears to sympathize with her. Then he points to her history of lying and says he can't trust her. Eventually, the police tell her that they know she was involved, and she starts to break down.
Yeah, I was researching for this episode, and one of the things that apparently betrayed Jennifer's emotional lack of development was that she kept quote unquote crying into a tissue. And apparently, when the investigators looked at the tissue, it was bone dry, which, like, another point of advice from Das Criminal, always carry a Cryolan tear stick. It's one of those things that actors use to trigger your eyes to well up, and, actors use it to simulate crying. You never know when you're going to need that.
I think it also signals how immature she was that she ever thought she would get away with this.
Oh, yeah, like, this was a harebrained idea from the beginning. Like, it was bound to fail.
Jennifer initially tried to claim that she had tried to organize the hit on herself, a complicated suicide attempt to avoid embarrassing her family. But police didn't believe it, and neither did the jury. With a trove of digital correspondence supporting Jennifer and the men's involvement, Jennifer, Daniel Wong, Lenford Crawford, and David Milvaginam were convicted of murder and attempted murder. Carty was tried separately and pled down to conspiracy to commit murder. Jennifer Pan was sentenced to 25 years to life for her part in the plot. Han sent a statement to her sentencing hearing about how the event had ruined his life. Quote, "When I lost my wife, I lost my daughter at the same time. I don't feel like I have a family anymore. Some say I should feel lucky to be alive, but I feel like I am dead too." End quote. Felix moved away and wants to distance himself from his family. Han and Felix requested that the judge bar Jennifer from ever contacting them again, and he agreed. She is also forbidden from contacting Daniel Wong. Wong, Milvaginam, and Crawford each received sentences of 25 to life. Carty received an 18-year sentence due to his plea deal, but died in prison under suspicious circumstances in 2018. Carty had been linked to another homicide before the Pan trial, so it's possible he made enemies all over the place. This case ignited a discussion, particularly in the Asian diaspora, about the impacts of tiger parenting. Was Jennifer a cold-blooded murderer, or was she pushed to her limits by her strict parents? I looked around some threads about this case on subreddits like r/truecrime, and there are lots of commenters saying that while they could never condone what Jennifer did, they understand why she felt driven to do it. Many people with authoritarian parents can relate to feeling beaten down, frustrated, and hopeless under their control. Lots of commenters claiming to have grown up under tiger parents said they also felt suicidal at times. Even though she was 24 years old at the time of the murder, I don't think Jennifer Pan was a well-adjusted adult who can evaluate her options and their consequences like you and I can. That's not an excuse, it's just something to consider. The plot itself was carried out by amateurs, and law enforcement pretty much immediately figured it out. I don't think York Regional Police are a bunch of Einsteins. The home invasion cover was never going to work. Maybe if Jennifer hadn't been home at the time of the murder and had a good alibi, or if the murderers had shot her in the shoulder or something, but she didn't die, she might have gotten away with it.
Yeah, it seems like the entire plan was organized by this mentally stunted, socially maladapted woman. It's a harebrained plot. But at the same time, it's like, was it fair to try her like as an adult? Like, I know there's very stringent requirements on like mens rea and all that, but I do think that there's something here about whether she's capable to be tried as an adult, kind of like Gypsy Rose.
It's also easy for us to ask, why didn't Jennifer leave? But I try to avoid putting that onto abuse victims, and I do think that Jennifer's parents controlled her to such an extent that it was abusive. In one of the interviews, when asked if she hired the hitmen, Jennifer says something to the police officer like, "No, I wouldn't do that. If I didn't want to be there, I would have left." So it's not as though she was unaware that she could leave the house. This kind of makes me think she and Daniel Wong wanted to work out a situation where she wouldn't be under her parents' control but could still enjoy their financial support.
I mean, I don't know. On one hand, I think she's aware she could have left the house, but I don't know if we could truly assess how dependent she was on her parents' sort of validation and approval to be able to do that.
Right, and she obviously really hated them if she would have them killed. Speaking of Daniel Wong, I think he's just as responsible for this as Jennifer. He set everything up and encouraged her to go through with it when she was having second thoughts. He got the same sentence as her, so it's not as though he got off lightly, but it sort of bothers me that most of the spotlight is on her when he's just as culpable.
I do wonder how his family feels about the whole thing. Like, also, it strikes me as rather odd that Daniel was so invested in this even after their breakup. Like, if you're out there going trying and dating this Christine woman, surely you don't care what happens, you know?
Yeah, that struck me as very strange. And also, I hate to say it, but Bich and Han did have a good point that Daniel was not good for Jennifer. Clearly, they're a toxic couple.
Yeah, that shows a lot, yeah.
So when does strict parenting veer into abuse? This is a difficult question because lots of parents will say they push their children out of love, and often even spend large sums of money on lessons and tutors. So people are reluctant to see that as abuse. I feel so bad for children in these situations because they probably appear very privileged to the outside world, while at home they face verbal and emotional abuse if they don't score high enough. So it's easy for people to dismiss those allegations of abuse. Pushing and controlling your child out of love or good intentions can't undo the damage it causes to their mental health. Children are also human beings, not robots or extensions of their parents. At the same time, I think you have to be a parent. I don't think it's fair to bully your children for not getting straight A's, but you should set standards for treating other people with respect and slowly becoming adults by learning to manage their own chores and such.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that too much freedom can be as debilitating to a child development as too little. Because children are creatures of pure id, you know? Their prefrontal cortices have not developed yet from a neuroscientific perspective. So fundamentally, they have no capacity to determine consequences for their actions or really envision long-term goals and plans. So in that sense, I think part of being a good parent is establishing boundaries and inculcating your child with, ethics and morals that lead them into being healthy, well-adjusted adults. Like, I wouldn't yell at my kids for not getting A's, but like, if they're struggling academically, I definitely try and intervene by spending time with them to teach them the material myself, or, talk to them, see what's bothering them or something to that sort.
Definitely. Everything in balance. And like, if my child consistently does get straight A's and then suddenly starts getting C's, it's my responsibility as a parent to be like, are you okay? And in Bich and Han's defense, they didn't even know that she was getting C's because she didn't tell them.
But it also shows that, part of parenting is creating a safe enough environment where you can come to your parents if you think you've made a mistake or, made an error of some sort.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So I do think Bich and Han tried to control Jennifer to the point that it was abusive, but I don't think murder was the answer to her problems. But it speaks volumes that she thought it was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't condone the murder at all. But I think the shoe drops when you talk about her parents monitoring her odometer to make sure she goes exactly the right distances that she claims she's been to.
Right. And what really turned it for me were all those Reddit comments of people saying, I understand how she feels.
Yeah.
So despite her parents' best efforts to mold her into a high achiever, Jennifer was emotionally underdeveloped and ended up in prison.
Yeah, 25 to life. Not going to be leaving anytime soon.
I wonder if, like Gypsy Rose, she's doing well in prison because she's used to a structured environment, and also she was sort of already living under a prison in her parents' house, so she might actually thrive.
Yeah, maybe, actually. That's a good point.
Yeah, so that is the Jennifer Pan case and the discussion around tiger parenting.
Yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed this bizarre story.
If you like our content, you can find us on Patreon/DosCriminal. We just recorded an episode on the Gardner heist. I just have to edit it. I have a job, so sometimes I have to go to work and not edit our podcast all day.
So if you also like us, please follow us on Instagram at DasCriminalPod. Rate and review and tell your friends, tell your family, tell everyone about us. And thank you for the lovely reviews so far. We do read them and they really make our day.
Thank you so much, guys. We love you.
Yeah, have a good one. Bye.
Bye.